So the first question I wanted to ask you was, if this experiment is successful, what would Sheffield look like in, say, 5 or 10 years' time?
Okay. Well, I think it's about what we think about success, what success is. So what do we mean by that? And I thought about that for this year, that if you don't mind me saying, just what about this year? Actually, I think this year we've already been really, really successful. We've actually tapped into some real sort of desire for people to look at food in a bit more detail. And we've got over 220 people, a couple of schools in that, participating in this project. And if nothing else happens, we've already done really well, I think. But looking to next year, if we can have a few kilos of flour that we can all bake with together, that people come together and have a memory of having done something together, that will be a signifier to me of some success. That we've got some seed for the following year that we can plant next autumn, so that we can do it again. And also, if we've got some people who've had such a good time this year, they want to have another go the following year. So we've got we're starting to gather a train that'll take us through some years. So that's sort of, in a way, that's sort of quite narrow, isn't it? But so, 5, 10 years, we've got to think a little bit more broad. What does that really mean? We'll do that over a number of years, but is there some sort of wider impact? And I think from a bakery perspective, there's a couple of things really. One is that I'd like our bakery to be able to source some flour from locally grown wheat. I'd like it to be able to be available to other bakeries in Sheffield as well. There's lots of fantastic bakeries in Sheffield, and if they can join on that would be great. So that would be a mark of some success, that there is a supply of wheat that we can regularly tap into, that's been locally grown, and we can mill locally as well. So that would be one big thing to have happened. But it comes from that if there is that locally grown wheat, there's people growing it locally, whether that's still on the small scale in our back gardens, in our little grow pots, but also there will have to be some people growing it on a larger scale, whether that's quarter, half, 1 acre, whatever it is, there will have to be. So that's going to have some impact as well on growing systems in and around Sheffield. But there's another impact from a bakery perspective, I think, that is very much sort of part of the bakery's mission, if you like, which is that if we're doing this on a year-by-year basis, then it follows that it will be meeting together to bake together as a community on a yearly basis. So there's something there that's part of the Sheffield calendar. So if we have that, bit like, I think Healy City Farm do an apple day every year, and you sort of expect it. I expect the posters to be going up around September time, Healy City Farm's apple day. I'd love it if we can have, there's going to be Sheaf Community Bakeries open baking event with locally grown flour. Bring your wheat, we'll thresh it, we'll winnow it, we'll mill it all together. And if that's part of the calendar, fantastic. That will be a real mark. But still, they're quite sort of, in some ways, those will be great, but they're also still quite narrow things. They're not Sheffield-wide stuff in a way. And to be able to impact on Sheffield-wide, it's possibly beyond this project's own capacity, obviously. But it is part of other things that are going on. And together with those other things, say, there's lots of people in Sheffield and around Sheffield doing magnificent things around food, getting people interested in where it comes from, producing some fantastic food, and making sure that's available to people, not just in some sort of ghettoized privileged elite, but actually much more widely than that. But I think there's lots of things that are going to be impacting on us in Sheffield that is really going to possibly shake our food supply. And the big thing I think here is Brexit. I have no idea how that is going to impact on our pricing, on our food supply, and the variety of food that we have now and have come to expect. Don't know. So if this project is able to help downplay any bad impacts from Brexit, that would be magnificent. But it's, who knows what they are? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, there was some really nice things in there. There was one thing that I really want to come back to, but I might leave for later on, and that was around the phrase that you said, meeting together to bake together, which is a really beautiful phrase. So I want to come back to that. But first, I just wanted to get your understanding as from a baker's perspective on flour.
Right,
I mean,
okay.
is there something you could just talk about what that means to you, what's important, all the different kinds of flour? I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but something just quick overview to get the kind of the baker hands and mind and heart perspective on flour.
Right. Well, I think probably the first thing to say is that I'm really very much a beginner. I've only been doing this for 3 or 4 years. So, and in that time, I baked with probably quite a narrow range of flours. But I have really noticed the difference between baking with flour that has been through a high-speed industrial mill, and that is non-organic white flour, and flour that is got all the wheat germ there in it, so it's wholemeal flour and has been stone ground. I've really noticed the difference in how it feels. It's just on your hands, and its water absorption and how it reacts to the different environments that I have in the bakery, and what I have to do to it to make it do what I want. Sometimes wholemeal flour is actually harder to work with, but I also get a sense that I'm getting a different smell from it, something that feels to me more wholesome. Whether that's a psychological reaction, because I know that I'm not baking blind. I know that I'm working with whole flour. So whether I'm thinking, oh yes, this is great, or whether it's really there, who knows? But that's what I feel. So I'm not going to disregard that. And I do notice definitely a different feeling on my hands. So I know that I'm baking something that is really nutritious, that is going to really fill you up when I'm baking with wholemeal flour. So mostly I bake with wheat flour. I have baked with other flours, not necessarily bread, although I do some gluten-free bread with non-wheat flour. And what can I say about that? It's fascinating just to get an understanding of what it's going to do, the chemistry of it, and the experimentation of it, I think.
Could you talk a bit about, I was going to say why you got into baking, but it's more really about, it was really interesting hearing you talk about the sort of the hands. And then I just imagined, I think you sent me a fact a while ago to do with the amount of bread that's bought in this country and what the percentage was from, you know, the kind of main brands, which is essentially the industrialized process. And it was huge, you know, it was like 90-something%. I can't remember. How does that make you feel, and what is the real difference for you?
The difference between what?
Well, I don't know. I guess not sort of the descriptive difference between industrial processes and hand processes, but the kind of the feelings behind it. You know, what does that make you feel, knowing that most of the bread in this country is made in that industrialized way?
Well, it's what does it make me feel? There's an aspect of it, I think, that makes me feel sad, actually, because it means that it's a signifier of our lives and how speedy we need it to be for some reason. To some extent, it's a signifier of low wages. And that makes me cross, that people have to, are expected to live their lives and be content with very little in a place where there is actually ample for everybody. That makes me cross. But on a more cerebral, sort of not necessarily feeling level, it's a problem, isn't it? It's a problem about how do we make sure people have enough nutritious food? And we seem to have solved this problem by mass production of quite low quality produce. I don't know that I've got an answer, but I know we haven't got an answer at the moment. What we're doing now is not right. And there's a problem from all angles. There's a problem for growers, for farmers. The biggest issue that's been since cities is how do we feed the cities? Because they're not growing food. Farmers growing food. How do we get it into the cities? Who gets paid? Does the farmer get paid? Or do the city people get paid? At the moment, we've got a situation where I don't know very much about economics of the farm, but I know that for some farmers, it's really, really hard. It's really hard work to make a living. Not all, I don't think, but for some. But clearly for some people in the cities, if they were to pay an unsubsidized price for food, it would be beyond them. So they have to have cheap food. And they have to have cheap food because they're on really low wages. And I suspect it's for a lot of people, when I say farmers, I'm actually talking about agricultural workers there, not the landowners. So I know it's hard, but we certainly haven't got a solution to food economics in our current system here. How do we feed people fairly at a fair price?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I wanted to go back to the quote that you said earlier around meeting together to bake together, and I think that resonated with me quite a lot. And there is something that I would like you to talk around about what bread is more than bread. What does bread do in terms of bringing people together, both in a literal sense of sort of what you're talking about is sort of breaking together, but something more than that, maybe around kind of gifting, or the soul of bread. What's the soul of bread about?
Well, you said it there, Ruth, actually. Bread is about bringing people together, quite literally. the Latin word panis is the root of both bread and the word companion. So the word companion is about breaking bread together. So it's quite deep rooted in our language and our culture and our history to eat together. You know, that we eat quite individually now is probably something, is a sort of post-industrial thing, isn't it? You know, like communities would eat together. Certainly communities used to bake together. They take their bread down to the baker and it would all be baked together, and presumably I'm guessing here, but you might mill around the bakers while your bread was baking and have a little chat, just like you would when you were going to get your water from the well. People would take their pot roast down to the bakers to cook while, you know, to get the last embers from the heat from the bakery. You know, that bread's not unique in this. It's about pulling together and sharing our food, because that gives us both physical and social sustenance, I think. So the idea of the growing together and then meeting together to engage in this long history of agricultural process of threshing and winnowing, which I've never done. I can't even say, you know, I only know that it happens. So part of it personally was, how is this done? How has it been done for centuries? And still in a lot of world done manually. It's not so long that it's been industrialized. So there's a curiosity for me, and I dare say for other people engaged in the project, you know, how is it done? I thought it would be a way of having a bit of fun, to be honest. You know, like that sort of, you know, often when you discovering these sorts of things, you're having a bit of a laugh, aren't you? You know, because, oh, I didn't know it was done like that, and let's see how it happens here, and somebody's going to fall over in a funny way, aren't they? You know, all those sorts of things that happens when you try and do stuff together that isn't going to be quite right, because it's going to be quite inefficient, isn't it? You know, really, you know, when we doing it for the first time. And in that way, you sort of start to meet more people. You're building a community locally, and you'll see those people on the street, and you'll know, oh, I know you. You did this with me, and we had a laugh. And suddenly, you're sort of building up connections and bringing people together, not just in that event, but in the streets that surround us. When actually, so much of what we consume and the way that we consume us would try and divide us. And that's what that means to me personally, and I hope to the people that take part.